And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
Welcome to Boomer Life on CIL 650. I'm George Gordon. On Boomer Life today, we're talking about the latest innovations in hearing with NexGenHearing. We're going to be talking about the inner workings of the ear from an expert perspective and offer some real solutions, the most important part, for those who suffer from hearing loss. Joining me in studio from NexGenHearing, registered audiologist Dr. Ted Venema. Dr. Ted, before we go on to the topic of hearing loss, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I'm a guy who lives in a van down by the river. I'm an audiologist who moved over here from Ontario 2 years ago, and but I studied in Bellingham, Washington, just south of the border here. So I'm registered with the College of Audiologists and Speech Pathologists here in British Columbia. And I ran a clinic with NexGen for a year, and now I do a lot of contract work with NexGen still. And I've been an audiologist for some 10, 15, 20 years by now, something like that. I'm 105 years old.
I understand.
Okay.
You look very good for that. Well, what drew you? What drew you to that profession?
That's an excellent question. Actually, some 20 years ago, my girlfriend and I were walking up Hastings, and I said to her, I've got to get a job. I've got to get a real job. I got to learn how to do something that other people don't know how to do. And she said, well, you're kind of a yacker. Why don't you become a speech therapist?
Right.
So I applied to Western Washington University in Bellingham and enrolled in the speech language pathology program. After about 6 months, I realized that's not really what I wanted to do. I'd slid over to the sister science of hearing.
Got it.
Because all speech and hearing is taken. All speech pathologists have to study some audiology, and all audiologists have to study some speech. So I switched over to the audiology side kind of indirectly. I ended up just doing it, and I quite enjoyed it. It's kind of like optometry, but for the ear.
I've often wondered when any professional enters a new area, a new expertise, it's like, was it an eye-opener, so to speak? It's a bit of a play on words, an eye-opener as to just how serious the problem of hearing loss has become in this country.
Well, yeah, it's an unsung sense, hearing. I mean, hearing loss is invisible. You can't see it, and people believe what they see. And so I stumbled into it completely from the outside, this whole field. I never grew up thinking, I want to work and become an audiologist one day. I just stumbled into it, but it was a fascinating field because, once you go through the door, you realize there's a whole world out there called hearing and hearing loss. And it's so rampant. I mean, 1 person in 3 over 65 years of age should be wearing hearing aids. And 1 person in 2 over 75, same thing.
Wow.
So it's rampant, and it's an unsung sense, and it affects not only the person who has it, but it affects others, of course, because it's a communicative sense. So people often are dragged in by their spouses or significant others because hearing loss involves necessarily both the speaker and the listener.
I would imagine that as you turn the pages on this new book and the new chapters in your life, you realize the impact on the person, everybody around them, quality of life.
Yeah,
incredible.
It is. It's a quality of life issue. It really is. And I think so many people put off doing anything about it. They know they've got a problem. Their wives, their husbands are telling them, you're missing parts of the conversation. Right. You're not around, and but people tend to wait, and research shows people wait at least 5 to 7 years before doing something about it after they realize they should do something about it. Research has shown that over and over again. It's only 20% of people who should wear hearing aids do wear hearing aids.
There you go. Well, we're going to talk a bit more about the impact and some of the connections that have been made with hearing loss a little bit later in the show. But let's start off talking about hearing aids. By their name, we know what they should do, but what don't they do?
Well, that's a great question. They don't function like glasses. Like they don't just make sounds louder. That's what glasses would do. They focus light properly on the eye, but there's nothing blocking the passage of sound. with most people. Only 5% of people have a physical blockage of sound caused by an ear infection or excessive wax or whatever. But most people suffer from what's called sensory neural, or what the doctors used to call nerve deafness. Yeah. You got nerve deafness. or as the farmer used to be told, you got tractor deafness.
Yes.
You know? And what happens is they lose treble. And we can explain more about this in just a bit, but hearing aids need a prescription, just like your glasses do. Because your hearing levels, your hearing sensitivity across the pitches, from bass to mids to treble, everybody's got different amounts of hearing sensitivity. And the hearing aids should provide like a mirror image of the hearing loss. And so they need to be tuned, just much like an equalizer, amplifies certain sounds at certain pitches. That's what hearing aids have to be made to do. And so they are programmed digitally on a computer, and you couldn't wear my hearing aids, I couldn't wear your hearing aids. It's the same thing as glasses that way, but a lot of people don't know that. They think, oh, hearing aids just make sounds louder. That's not true. They'll make certain sounds louder because they're supposed to for your hearing loss. They'll make certain sounds louder for me because they're supposed to for my hearing loss.
I would think that this is important not just for people who have gone and had the test and discovered they've had some form of hearing loss, but for people who may have had older hearing aids that aren't functioning as well anymore. Do you see a lot of these cases coming in?
Yeah, people have a stigma about hearing aids, like they're the big beige banana things behind your ear.
That squeal.
Yeah, and that squeal. And those days are gone. Today's hearing aids, you can't even see them. The connection to behind the hearing aid that sits right behind your ear, the box is tiny. And you have a tiny little wire going down the front of your ear that nobody can even see. And then the sound is emitted into your ear canal. And the hearing aids today are highly sophisticated. There's digital noise reduction. They've got directional microphones that focus in the direction in which you want to hear. They've got something called compression. They can be programmed, and we'll talk about each of these elements that I'm mentioning, hopefully today while we're on the show. But they've got there's a lot of sophistication in today's hearing aids that's quite unsung and unheralded, and people should know about it.
Well, a lot of research has gone in, and people have invested money in finding a better way to do it. Like you say, if we didn't change the technology, we'd still be driving 3,000-pound cars that got 10 miles to the gallon. Let's talk a little bit about the big reason. And when the first time I saw this word, it sounded like a church I used to go to. It's sensorineural hearing loss, NHL, and the most common type is?
Presbyterian. It's presbycusis.
Right.
And they have the same root word, presby. Presby happens to be the Greek word for elder. Presbyterian Church of the Elders, as opposed to the deacons, presbyopia. Your arms aren't long enough to see the page.
Right.
That hits you when you're about 40. You need reading glasses. And presbycusis is hearing loss in the elderly, and that hits around 60, 65. And you lose treble hearing. And when you said that long word, sensorineural, let's just clarify this. This is important. When you're wearing earplugs because you're trying to block out the lawnmower or excessive noise, you're giving yourself a hearing loss on purpose, right? You're trying to dull your ability to hear sound. And that is called conductive hearing loss. And conductive, that word conduction, like electricity is conducted through a wire. The wire conducts electricity, right? Conduction means the pathway. Conductive hearing loss means there's a blockage in the pathway that sound is taking in one or more parts of your ear. Now, who has that? As I said earlier, someone with excessive wax in his ears, a kid with ear infection. Conductive hearing losses are only 5% of hearing loss. Think of the eyeball. Most vision loss also is conductive. Somehow light isn't getting properly focused on the back of your eye, called the retina. And every one of our listeners has heard of the word retina. I mean, that's the back of your eyeball. And that changes light into electricity. And electricity is the language your brain understands. In most vision loss, there's nothing wrong with the retina. It's just fine, Jack. It's just the light isn't getting properly focused on it. It's not conducting properly. So you go to the dollar store or you go to the optical place, you get glasses, and they refocus the light. They conduct it properly on the intact retina. Such is not the case in hearing. In hearing, it's like the retina itself is ruined. And it's the inner ear. You've got the outer ear just gathers sound. The middle ear has the three little bones, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. And the inner ear is that cochlea, C-O-C-H-L-E-A, shaped like a snail. Tiny, about as big as your pinky fingertip. And in there is that's the retina of the ear. And in 95% of people with hearing loss, that's where the damage is, to these tiny little hair cells inside that cochlea. And that's called sensory neural hearing loss. 95% of vision loss is conductive. There's a blockage of light getting properly. And 95% of hearing loss is sensory neural, where the retina, in quotes, of the ear itself is damaged.
So I use an example. Now that we understand the science behind the word that I still have a hard time pronouncing, because we talk about the different levels of what you're missing in your hearing,
Yep.
we have a better understanding of how to make the equipment to bring that hearing back.
Right. And the thing about sensory neural hearing loss is the floor of your hearing is elevated. You can't hear soft sounds. And yet, loud sounds hurt, just like they would for a normal hearing person. For example, if you have normal hearing, 100 decibels is going to be painfully loud. If you have sensory neural hearing loss, 100 decibels is going to be painfully loud. Okay, your ceiling of loudness tolerance is quite similar. What's happened is your floor of hearing sensitivity has gone up. So now you might be able to hear from 50 decibels to 60, 70, 80, 90, but you can't hear softer than 50. Okay? A normal hearing person can hear from 0, which is very, very soft, up to 100, which is really loud. Hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss, means you can't hear till it's about 50. And then still 100 is you're too loud. So it's like me standing up on this table. My feet are higher, but the ceiling didn't get any higher. They call that your dynamic range, your decibel distance between your floor and your ceiling has become smaller. And it's deafness, totally deaf. That means your floor has met your ceiling. So if you came up to someone who's stone deaf and who's using sign language, and there's lots of people like that, if you yelled in his ear, he'd wind up and smack you on the side of the head because it would hurt him just like it hurts you and me.
More to come about the advancements that NexGenHearing has made in hearing aids. What they've discovered can be linked to hearing loss. We're going to talk a little bit, in our next section, we'll talk a little bit more about just exactly how they are made.
Yep.
I think people will be fascinated by that. You're listening to Boomer Life on CIL 650. If you'd like some more information about what Dr. Ted Venema and I are talking about here today, you can go to NexGenHearing.com. This is George Gordon. This is Boomer Life.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CIL 650.